Hey, Mr. Cropper. We both know we don't really agree on much. I've posted a couple video responses to you, but haven't gotten much feedback in return, which is okay. But I think, I agree with you that environmentalism is a religion. I wouldn't identify myself as an environmentalist just because the connotation is that somehow the environment is more important than the organism. And certainly there are a lot of uh, environmentalists who do hate um, the human being, at least in the form um, through which it is manifesting now, at this particular historical period. Um, and we shouldn't hate the human being, because if we're going to solve um, the problem which human beings have created for the rest of the planet, for the rest of nature, which really, nature is a scientific word, which in the last few hundred years has come to mean just what you said, a system of laws that we can investigate, that we being the human being, human consciousness and rationality. And it's interesting that you said Kant, or you implied that Kant hates the human being and hates reason, when if someone were to ask me um, to name a philosopher who championed reason, um, Kant would be top on my list, um, and who championed the human being, Kant would also be top on my list. If there ever was a humanist, it was Kant, and humanism is exactly the religion that you are indoctrinating your school children, your students, to believe in. And see, you may take that as an insult if I call humanism a religion, but I don't. I don't mean it in that way, because I'm a religious person. Everyone's a religious person if they um, believe and act with commitment and resolve. Um, if they act authoritatively, in other words, if they try to make a difference in life, it's because of some religious, intense um, belief or experiential call, and we can't avoid that. So if you believe in humanism, then by all means, that's what you have to believe in. Uh, but the problem is when we elevate the human being so far above the merely natural world, we end up exploiting it. And because we do live on an actual planet, finite, a finite planet, which is, see, it's more than a system of laws. It's also a community of living creatures, human beings among them, certainly. And human beings are valuable, but so too are birds and flowers and bees and microorganisms in the soil and the oceans. Um, these too are alive, and every other species and different coalitions of other species on this planet have their own economies that depend on the same systems of exchange of matter and energy in the biosphere that human beings depend on for their economy, for our economy. And if we ignore the rest of these economies and only pay attention to the human economy, we end up destroying our own ability to survive. Because an ecosystem behaves and acts as a whole, and if human beings try to separate themselves from the whole, um, and try to control it, as we are, at least in our modern incarnation as human beings, we are trying to control, and in so doing, destroying the natural world. Because the kind of intelligence that human beings think is valuable at this particular point in our history is a manipulative, technological intelligence that stands outside its object and sort of controls it from above. The way this manifests in our emotional experience of life is like you can talk about nature as though it were just this objective thing out there that you can study with mathematical laws and experiments. Um, but to do that though, you're now talking about an abstraction, nature, which can be studied and measured certainly, but you're taking your experience and artificially separating it from what you have just called nature, because you are nature, as you admitted. And so, from my point of view, everything that we feel and emotionally experience and intuit and imagine and spiritually long for, all of that is just as valid as rationality, which is another thing which we experience. And, you know, um, the problem comes when we champion a particular kind of rationality and hold it above all other ways of knowing. There are many kinds of intelligence besides this manipulative technological form that human beings have become obsessed with. Uh, there are intuitive ways of knowing, emotional ways of knowing, artistic ways of knowing, um, that are in many cases more powerful than the rational way of knowing, because they don't artificially separate the components of a system. They operate by participating in the system. Um, and I think unless human beings learn to participate with nature as nature, if we instead try to remain outside of it, above it, more important than it, such that we can use it as a mere store of resources for our own, um, you know, artificial, man-made values and endeavors. If we completely separate these two realms of being, we will destroy ourselves, because nature is a whole which we are a part of, and if we exploit the rest of the whole, we're going to destroy ourselves in the process. Um, so, from my point of view, human beings will always be religious animals. That's in fact why we don't think of ourselves as a normal animal, because we are a religious animal. We are a conscious animal, and because we're conscious, we know. And knowledge, if you really believe it, is going to drive you to um, religious practice, because knowing is a religious or a spiritual activity. Um, and unless we participate in it, we end up destroying it. Um, So, while you would have a very rationalist, dualistic epistemology, whereas there's a pure knower on the one hand, and then a purely objective known thing, I would say that really experience is prior to any subject-object division, and so our knowledge, if it be true, if it be accurate and whole, then it will always include the knower and the known in a single um, process, um, as if we lay down a path in walking, as one philosopher put it. Our knowing is also a doing, and our doing is also a knowing. Um, and so, you're probably going to say this is completely irrational. I see it coming. Um, Actually, you're probably not going to say anything at all. That's okay too.